Alright friends, today we're going to learn how to use product analytics to make a product that grows fast and is loved by its users. By the time you're done with this video, you'll have a working knowledge of the key areas of product analytics and will immediately be able to use them in your work. I'm also going to let you know what the next steps are if you want to take it beyond the basics and get lots more hands-on experience so you can become a product analytics expert. Whether you're a product manager, product analyst, a UX lead, or even a startup CEO, having a strong knowledge of product analytics is absolutely essential to you being good at your job. This is because product analytics is an integral part of the overall product development and improvement cycle. Here's how. This is a summary of the product development cycle. There is this incorrect belief that analytics is a step in this overall process, but in reality, it's an attribute of every step as opposed to a step of its own. As you're designing the product and thinking of the problem it's going to solve and how it's going to be used, you have to have an idea of what constitutes success for your product, and that's where you need to develop product success metrics. Then while you're developing your product, you need to make sure that you track your key user actions to enable analysis and monitoring of those metrics. And then once your product is released, you need to actually perform that analysis, which allows you to see where you're underperforming and improve on it through iteration. And then this process repeats itself on and on as your product gets more and more sophisticated. So you see why I say it's crucial, because it's literally necessary for you to go from each step of the cycle to the next, otherwise you're just completely flying blind and doing a bunch of random things hoping something works. And you know what? Sometimes just doing things at random does work, it does, but it's so rare that it's not really a strategy. It's like if someone says their plan for getting rich is to win the lottery. Like yeah, some people definitely get rich that way, but it's not exactly a plan, is it? A plan involves a proven and repeatable process that's going to keep improving your situation over time, like what I'm going to teach you here. These three topics are what this course is going to be working on. We're going to dedicate some time to each, giving you hands-on knowledge that you can immediately apply after you're done with the video. And I'll also tell you what the next steps are, because product analytics is a very deep topic, so there's only so much you can learn in about an hour or so. So for those of you who want to go deeper, you'll get help with that too. By the way, the order we're going to cover things is going to be metrics first, then analysis, then tracking. This is because while tracking comes before analysis in application, I find that it's easier to learn analysis first because tracking can be a bit of an abstract concept. So seeing it in action first will help you learn it much easier. And by the way, if you're someone who's watched all of my previous videos, you know that I've already covered some of these topics, so some of this won't be new to you, especially the section on product success metrics, which is directly lifted from another video. But this is the first time I've put everything together in a way that they're all interconnected, so you'll still get a lot out of this even if you've watched other videos of mine before. Alright, now let's get started on the topic of setting product metrics, also known as product KPIs. This is arguably the most important skill you need to have if you're a product manager, growth manager, or a startup founder. Everything you do starts and ends with metrics that are used to measure the impact of your work, so you gotta make sure you're good at developing those metrics. And don't worry, this method works both for when you're building a whole product from scratch or if you're adding features to an existing product. I use the term product for both cases. I'm going to start by explaining how this metric defining method works, and then we're going to do a few examples of applying it to products in different categories like software as a service, also known as SaaS, e-commerce, and content platforms, so you can see it in action and really understand how to apply it to your specific product. You should think of your product metrics as a pyramid. At the top you have one metric, and below it you have a row of other metrics that contribute to that metric at the top. Then each of those metrics have other metrics that contribute to them, and so on. You start with the first two rows when you're in the early stages of the product, and then you add more as the product becomes more sophisticated. It's kind of like how a startup works. When it starts, you have the founder, CEO, and maybe one or two co-founders. Then as the startup grows, those people each build out their own teams that report to them. Those new people build out their own teams, and so on. The point is, you start with the most overarching roles and get more granular over time as your business grows and becomes more sophisticated. The same thing applies for success metrics of a product. When we go through this method together, it's going to feel like it only focuses on the top two rows of the pyramid. And that's essentially true. But the beauty of it is that you can carve out your own smaller pyramids out of this big pyramid and apply this method to them too. Which is why it works for both a whole product and for specific new features of that product. You'll see exactly how as we work through the examples at the end of the video. This method focuses on 6 key metrics. They are
exposure, onboarding, which is optional, activation, engagement, retention, and focus. In order to come up with these 6 metrics, your very first step is to map out the user's journey throughout your product at a high level. Specifically, you need to focus on 3 key points within a typical user journey. First, you have the point at which the user has their first exposure to your product. For a typical web app, this is when the user arrives at the homepage the first time and hasn't done anything else. For a mobile app, it's when they see the welcome screen after they download and open the app for the first time. Note that we are not counting the moment where they see an ad for your product or when they see it in the App Store. We want the first moment that is actually a part of your product and you, as a product owner, have control over. This is your exposure moment. With most products, you have to create an account and go through some onboarding steps in order to use the product's core features. With some products, creating an account is optional and some don't require it at all. This is why this particular key point is also optional. You can add it if onboarding is required for users to get access to key parts of your product, but not required otherwise. For now, we'll assume it's required. So the second key point we'll identify is the completion of onboarding. This is when you've input all your info, your account is created, and you're in the main part of the app, but you still haven't done anything to get value out of the app. The third point we identify is the key action of your product, an action that the user gets value from. And yes, I know that most products have several of these, but for now, just pick the most important one. If your product is a messenger, then this would be the act of sending a message. If it's a platform like YouTube, this is the act of watching a video. We call this the activation point. Now that we have these 3, we're going to start defining all our metrics. You ready? Here we go. The first metric is called exposure, and it's the number of users who made it to the exposure point. Pretty simple. This metric looks at the very top of your product funnel, the beginning of your user journey, and is more of a reference point for the other metrics than a metric you'll be managing the product to. The second metric is onboarding success, which as you recall is optional. This metric looks at the conversion rate from exposure to onboarding completion, meaning the number of people who completed onboarding divided by the number of people who were exposed to your product. In some cases, there is a lot that a user can do in between exposure and when they start onboarding, in which case you can modify this metric to instead be defined as the number of people who completed onboarding divided by the number of people who started it. Both approaches are fine. Either way, this process is only done once per user, which is why we separate it from the other metrics. It's also a super key part of the product experience where many products lose a lot of users, so we want to make sure we can isolate its performance. The third metric is the activation rate. This metric looks at the conversion rate from onboarding completion to when the user takes a key action. So the number of users who activated divided by the number of users who completed onboarding. Remember that onboarding is optional. So if your product doesn't have onboarding, you can instead define it as the number of people activated divided by the number of people who were exposed to the product. Either way, the fundamental approach is the same. You're looking at the conversion rate from the previous key point of the journey to this one. This is a concept that we repeat throughout this method, so it's good to visualize it and remember it. The fourth metric is engagement rate. This metric looks at how much an active user is using your product, because not all active users are equal. For a messaging app, some users send a lot of messages, some only send a few. On YouTube, some users watch a lot of videos, some less. Just sending a message or watching a video means you're active, so we need a way to measure how active and engaged each specific user is. This metric is defined as the number of times key actions were done divided by the number of users who did that key action. So in the messaging app example, it's the number of messages sent per messaging user. In the YouTube example, it's videos watched per video watcher. Note that we're not saying videos watched per user. We're saying videos watched per video watcher. This is because dormant users can add a lot of noise to this metric if they get included in it. And whether a user remains dormant or takes a key action is already covered in our prior metric, which was the activation rate. So essentially, our engagement metric looks at how active each active user is. And then we have the retention rate. Retention is defined as a portion of your users who continue to take key actions in your product a fixed amount of time after they first activated. For example, 30-day retention looks at the number of people who are still active 30 days after they activated, divided by the number of users who activated in the first place. You can use different lengths of time for your retention metric based on your product, but 30 days and 90 days are the two most widely used ones. What we covered so far is that second row of the pyramid. It covers the user journey from when they're first exposed to the product, through their onboarding and activation, and finally whether they retained or churned. But we also need to look at the top of the pyramid, which is also known as the focus metric. For the focus metric, we look at your number of active users, either daily, weekly, or monthly active users. All of the metrics that we discussed earlier contribute to this top metric in a key way. A drop in any of those numbers is going to result in a drop in this focus metric. And if your focus metric is growing and looking healthy, your product is likely doing well. But if it's not, then you can use all these other metrics to isolate and diagnose the issues that are contributing to it, whether it's that your onboarding flow is broken, your users aren't activating, or anything else. So to recap, we have exposure, which is the number of people who got exposed to your product. We have onboarding completion, which is the number of users who completed onboarding divided by the number of users who were exposed to your product, or those who started onboarding. This metric is optional, depending on your product type. Then we have activation rate, which is the number of people who took a key action divided by the number of people at the prior key point of the journey, either exposure or onboarding completion. Next up is engagement, which measures how engaged our active users are and is defined as the number of key actions divided by the number of active users. And last, we have retention, which is the number of people who continue to take key actions after a fixed amount of time, such as 30 days, divided by the number of users who activated in the first place. And all of these metrics roll up to the focus metric, which is your number of active users. I highly recommend taking a screenshot of both this slide and the previous one that showed the user journey and keeping them handy. It summarizes everything we cover in this video, and you can use it as a reference when you want to come up with metrics for your own product. Now that we've covered the concept, let's see it in action. We'll start with a fictional SaaS product. Imagine that you have a web app that allows you to create animations. It requires you to create an account, then gives you access to animating tools. You can start a new project where you'll be able to create drawings, animate them, and then publish the final result. We'll call this product, Granimate. Sorry, I'm not good with names and I just made this logo using a free logo generator, but it looks good enough for a fictional example so we can move on into setting success metrics for it. Now, remember the first step of the process. We got to lay out the key points in the user's journey. The first one is the exposure point, which in this case is the web app's homepage. So it would be when user gets to granimate.com and hasn't logged in yet. This fictional web app of ours also requires you to create an account before you use it. So we also mark our point of onboarding completion, which will probably be at a URL like app.granimate.com. The key action user will take is creating an animation. When someone creates an animation for the first time, you can consider them an activated user. Now let's lay out the metrics. The number of users who arrive at the homepage, granimate.com, is how we measure exposure. The onboarding success is the number of people who completed onboarding divided by the number who started onboarding. The activation rate is the number of people who create an animation divided by the number of people who complete onboarding. The number of animations created per active user is the engagement rate. The more animations each user creates, the more engaged they are. The retention rate is the percentage of people who create an animation after 90 days or more from when they activate. I went with 90-day retention in this case because I'm imagining this as a product used by professionals who will likely stick around a bit longer than hobbyists. And last but not least, the metric they all lead up to, the focus metric. Remember that we want active users, so it's just a matter of picking between daily, weekly, or monthly. The way I always decide this one is that I base it on the usage pattern of the users. Since this is a professional product, it'll likely get used a lot more on the weekdays than on the weekend. So it follows a weekly cyclical pattern, making weeks good units of time for comparing. So our focus metric will be weekly active users. Take a moment and review the formula for each metric. Alright, now let's say you decide you want to get a bit more granular. You say, okay, creating animation means that you export a video file containing your animation. But what about the moment where the user starts creating an animation? That's super important too. That's totally fine. That's also a key moment. So just draw it on your user journey map and treat it like you treat any other key point. Measure your conversion rate from onboarding completion to starting a project. That can be your activation rate. And then have a second similar metric that looks at your conversion rate from starting a project to exporting the final animation file. See what I did here? I took the method we were applying so far and expanded it to address this use case with a very simple change while still following the overall same approach. You added one more conversion metric. You can even give it its own engagement rate by measuring the number of projects started per project starter. Essentially, you can take that same activation, engagement, and retention metric and apply it to any key point in the user journey. Now, let's say you add a new feature to this animation platform. You can create images using an AI image generator and add them to your animation. You want to see how this new feature is performing, so you take the same method and apply it to only this feature. Let's think of the user journey throughout this feature. There is a button or pop-up that the user sees informing them that this cool new AI image generator tool is an option. That's your exposure point. When you actually add an AI image generated by this tool to your animation, that's your key action. So your exposure metric is the number of people who saw the button or pop-up for this feature. Your activation rate is the portion of those exposed users who use the tool to add an AI-generated image to their animation. Engagement rate is the number of images added per person who used the tool. And your retention rate is what percentage of activated users still use this tool 90 or more days later. The focus metric is again the number of weekly active users, except here active is defined as anybody who adds an image to their animation. This is an example of how this method works both for features in an existing product as well as a brand new product. One question you might ask yourself is, why do we focus so much on using rates in our metrics instead of raw numbers? Like, why do we look at onboarding completion rate and retention rate? Why don't we just look at how many users completed onboarding or how many users stuck around after 90 days? This is because we want to isolate the impact of that particular area of the product. If we use raw volume of users as the metric, then each metric will be heavily dependent on the ones before. If your onboarding develops a problem, then your activation and retention metrics will go down too. If your exposure metric goes down because your ad budget dropped, then all your downstream metrics will go down too. But if you normalize the metrics by looking at them as rates, for example, by dividing the number of users who finished onboarding by those who started it, then you'll be able to look at just how onboarding is performing. Exposure is the only exception here because it's the very top of the funnel, so there's nothing in the product before it that affects it. So you can keep it as a raw volume. And that's why we look at conversion rate, engagement rate, and so on, instead of looking at the raw number of users at each step. Alright, let's do another example. Let's take YouTube as the product. The homepage is the start of the journey, and watching a video is your key action. Onboarding isn't required for watching a video, so we leave it out of this example. So your exposure metric is the number of people at the homepage. Your activation rate is the conversion rate from exposure to watching the first video. Your engagement rate is the number of videos watched per video watcher. And your retention rate is the percentage of activated users who still watch videos after 30 or more days. For the focus metric, I'll go with daily active user, because YouTube gets used by all sorts of people on all days of the week, so looking at it on a daily basis is totally fine. For our last example, let's look at an e-commerce product, because e-commerce products are a little different from most other products. Just imagine a site like Amazon. The exposure point is when you arrive at the homepage of the app. And the onboarding success rate is the conversion from beginning to the end of the account creation process. The activation can be when you make your first purchase, but a lot of times people may not buy from you, not because the product is bad, but because you just don't have the item they're looking for, or you do and it's too expensive, which isn't the fault of the product itself, but rather its inventory. So I would look at the activation point as when a user looks at a page for a specific item. And then much like we did with our animation example, I'd add a second key action for when the user purchases something. Then you look at both the activation rate and also the conversion rate from looking at an item to buying that item. Your engagement rate will be your number of purchases per purchaser, and your retention rate is the percentage of buyers who come back and make another purchase after 30 days. Your focus metric can be the daily active users because e-commerce products typically get steady traffic on a daily basis. You can apply the same concept to pretty much any product. Remember, frameworks don't work perfectly well for literally every scenario, but they work pretty well for almost all of them. But with a bit of modification, just like the examples I showed you, you can apply them to whatever difficult use case you're dealing with. Just gotta do a few examples to get the hang of it, and you'll be the master of setting product success metrics. If you're curious if you're applying this method correctly, just post a comment under this video with a brief description of your product, the key points in the user journey, and the metrics you came up with. I'll reply to it and give you some feedback.
Alright, that concludes the portion on product success metrics. Now that we know how to come up with good metrics for our product, we're going to learn how to build dashboards that measure those metrics on an ongoing basis so we can see, for example, our activation rate dropped or our retention improved. Product analytics dashboards are typically built in product analytics tools such as Mixpanel, Post Hog, Amplitude, or Adobe Analytics, and a whole bunch more. These tools capture data directly through the product and then let you analyze that data without knowing how to code. They're all pretty similar to each other in functionality and have very similar analysis tools, so once you learn one, you've pretty much learned them all. In this course, we're going to use Mixpanel, but the tools I teach you exist in all the other tools I mentioned too, and they work the exact same way. When analyzing product data, the data points you use are pretty much always of the type that is referred to as an event. An event is basically any data point that has a timestamp, an action, and a user that it's attributed to. So a data point that says which user did what, when. You capture event data by adding code snippets to your product that track that information and send it to your product analytics tool. Events also come with additional data attached to them that provides more context to them and allows you to analyze them better. These contextual bits of information are referred to as event properties, or just properties for short. So to recap, a user action is an event, and the context for the action is its property. Let's learn it better with an example. Let's say you have an e-commerce site and you track the action of ordering an item. The event itself will be called order placed, and it will have a timestamp and user ID. And then alongside it, you track information like order cost, the item that was purchased, and the category it belongs to. Let's do another example. If you have a video player app like YouTube, then the event that you're tracking could be called video viewed, and it'll have properties like the name of the video, its duration, and the video's category. Another common action that is tracked is the act of signing up. So if we were to track both signing up and viewing a video, then you could use the formulas I taught you in the metrics section of this course and calculate all your metrics. And that's exactly what we're going to do here. We're going to learn how to make a dashboard that tracks all those metrics for a video player app. You can apply the exact same method to an e-commerce product or a SaaS one. You just use different events for it. And by the way, the tracking plan, which you'll learn to build right after this, is a spreadsheet that lists out all of the specific events and properties that you want to track. It's harder to do than it sounds, but it's a really important skill, which is why it gets its own section here. And while in practice it's done before this step, we're going to learn it in the inverse order because it's just easier to learn that way. Alright, now let's go to Mixpanel and learn to build a dashboard, starting with a quick tour of the product. This right here is the home page essentially of Mixpanel once you've logged in. It's referred to as a Discover page right now. For the purpose of this course, we're going to use sample data that comes with Mixpanel and is basically data for a media product much like YouTube. So it has events for actions like signing up, watching a video, commenting, liking, and so on. You can actually create a free account on Mixpanel and access this data to play around with and do exactly what I do here, which I highly recommend. It's a great way to learn things and get comfortable with this type of tool. This homepage here shows you a summary of a bunch of things, including some data, some popular dashboards, and more. And if you want to know how to access that sample data, just come over here to the top left where it says All Project Data, scroll down to Sample Datasets, and you pick Media, which is the one that we're going to be using for this project. Brings you to this dashboard by default. Okay, let's get started by looking at some examples of events that are in this project. So here in the left-hand panel, which by the way you can open up down here, I am going to come and select the Events tab, and this shows you a stream of all the events that are flowing into this project. Now again, this is sample demo data that comes with the product. It's not a live active product, so that's why all these times say a year ago. But for your case, it'll probably just say, 1 minute ago, 1 hour ago. It'll be much more recent. But it shows you an example of what sorts of events are coming into this product. So we got watch video, app install, like video, page view. Like I said, all this sort of stuff that you would expect on a product like YouTube. And you can take any individual event and you can open it and see a bunch of these examples of properties that I mentioned that are tracked alongside it. Mixpanel by default will track a bunch of things that are very generic, like, location, time, maybe like email, region, operating system, these types of things that work for every single event. But then there's more specific ones that you can track that attributed to that particular event. Like if you're doing watch video, you might want to track like the category of the video, like I said, or the title of the video, that kind of thing. All right, now that we know what kind of data this product has, let's get started by actually creating a board. So we're going to come over here to the top left and click on Create New and select Board. This creates a new untitled board for us. So I'm just going to call this for now my KPIs dashboard. You can give it a little description if you want. We're not going to do that right now. We're just going to save this as our dashboard, and that's going to make it show up over here under the Your Boards section. Now that we have the dashboard built, now we actually have to go add reports to it, right? This is empty right now. A dashboard is just a collection of reports. So we make the empty dashboard and then we add reports to it. So let's start with a report that measures our focus metric. Again, we'll come here to the top left. This time we select Insights. Insights is the most useful report used in Mixpanel. It covers probably, by my estimate, something like 70% of the use case if you're using the tool. And it's also the simplest one to use, which is really nice. So if you recall, in our product metrics section, we talked about the focus metric as being something like weekly active users, except that active is defined differently between different products. So for a video player app like YouTube, we're probably going to consider anybody who has viewed a video as an active user. So we have an event for viewing a video. That's what we're going to use for it. To do that, we come over here to the top right where it says select metric, and we look for an event that corresponds to viewing a video. In this case, we have watch video. So we're going to select that, and bam, right there, it generates a chart for you showing trends in video views. Notice that it says unique users right here, which means that it's counting the number of unique users that have watched a video on each day. So this is showing you essentially daily active users for the past 30 days. Every chart in Mixpanel has a few different tools essentially that you can use to adjust it. So this date picker over here is one of them. I'm going to switch this from 30 days instead to looking at the past 3 months. You'll notice that it also changed the granularity automatically from day to month, but we don't have to go with that. I'm going to switch it to week instead. Now we're getting weekly count of people who have watched a video in the past 3 months. So this can be thought of as our focus metric, because our focus metric was weekly active users, and an active user is defined as anybody who watches a video. Great, so let's save this to our dashboard. I'm going to pick my KPI dashboard is a place I want to save it. So that's saved. We don't want to leave it untitled, so we're going to give it a little title. Say focus metric, which is weekly active users. You can give it more of a description too if you want. Again, I'm just skipping some of these stages right now. All right, that's a very simple example of how to build our first report, one that shows focus metric. Now let's move on to the next one. If you recall, the next metric that we had was the activation rate. This metric is defined as a percentage of signed up users who turn into active users. Because remember, a user can create an account but never actually do anything of value in the product. It actually happens a lot. Most products have a big drop off at this stage. So you want to measure how well you're activating your users. For this, we are going to use what's called a funnels report. Again, we come over here to create new, and we use funnels. Notice that this time it's asking you for multiple steps of the funnel. So we said that we want to check sign up to activation. So sign up to video viewing. So I come over here, search for the sign up event. And for the second step, I reuse the same watch video event. There we go. Very quickly, it generates a funnel report for us that says that in the past 30 days, this many people, a little over 10K, have signed up. And of those folks, only 67% of them have gone to watch a video in that window. So we have a lot of room for improvement here if we want to make people watch more videos and activate better. One important thing about funnels is this concept of a funnel window. Right now it says 7 days. So essentially whenever a user signs up, Mixpanel starts a timer. And as soon as that timer hits 7 days, even if the user converts like on day 9 or 10 or something, it won't count them. It counts them as someone who did not convert. So if you want them to have more of a range to convert, you can always increase this to like 10 days, 14 days, anything that you want. But it will only count someone as converted if they do these actions within this duration. It doesn't matter how many actions you have. You can add other stuff here, like you can have, I don't know, liking a video or something like that, or a bunch of other stuff. They have to complete the entirety of the funnel within that window for it to count as a conversion. Another cool thing that you can do with funnels is you can look at the trend of conversion rate over time instead of seeing a snapshot that shows the drop off at each stage. So to do that, you would come over here, change this to maybe 3 months, and then switch it from funnel steps to a line. And this will show you how that conversion rate has changed, again, on a monthly basis, which we'll switch to weekly. There we go. This shows the changes in conversion rate in that funnel over time instead of a snapshot, which can be very useful as well. But for our purposes, we're going to switch back to funnel. We're going to give it a name. Activation rate. And we're going to save it to our dashboard again. By the way, you might recall that there was also an exposure metric. I just skipped that in this tutorial because it works just the same way as a focus metric in that it's just going to be a single event, which is like page view or sign up, and you just chart it over time. You wouldn't learn anything new there. So in the interest of save some time, I skipped it for you. But you would create that the same way. Next up, we have engagement. So let's go back to the insights report again. Here we're going to learn something a little bit new. So engagement was defined as the number of times a key action is done on average per active user. As the name says, it describes how engaged your users are, and the higher it is, the better. In our case, we want to find the number of videos watched per user. This is also built using the insights report. So we come over here again and we pick watch video once more. But now, see where it says unique users? We'll click on that and we notice that there's a bunch of different options here. For example, you could have switched from unique users to total events, which instead shows you just how many videos have been watched, regardless of if it was the same user watching them or 10 different users watching them. That's why the numbers are suddenly higher and the chart looks a little different. But the option that we want to use here is this frequency per user. Because remember, we want to measure videos watched per video watching user. So we come over to frequency per user and we want average, so we just select that. There we go. Notice how the numbers here are suddenly so much lower because now it's normalized. Now it's looking at videos viewed per video watching user. And this is our definition of engagement. So to line it up with the other metrics, again, I switch it to 3 months and I set the granularity to weekly. And now I have my engagement metric calculated as well. So I'll give it that name. And I will save it to my KPIs dashboard. Cool. The only metric left now is retention. There is a report dedicated to that, but we're going to skip going into it in too much detail because it's much more complicated to use than the others and will take a lot longer to explain. And usually it only has 1 or 2 cases for your company. But I do have a separate video on it that's much more detailed and goes into it. So if you want, once you're done with this video, go over there and check it out. But I'm just going to show you really quick where it's at. It's under retention, again, in the create new section. And the way it works is you give it 2 events, one as your cohorting event, sign up, and the other one being watch video. And it generates this retention chart. By default, it says, of the number of people who have signed up, how many people have done the second action in each of these subsequent days. Then you can also increase it, and this is where it gets complicated, and look at it on a cohorted basis. Like, of all the people who signed up on this day, how did that cohort perform? Then what about this one? And you can switch things between like how you measure retention. Again, I go much deeper into this stuff in the dedicated retention video that I have. So if you're interested in this particular use case, I really recommend checking that one out. But for our purposes, we're just going to call this retention and save it to our KPIs dashboard. I'm going to do one more thing here just to show you some extra functionality that Mixpanel has. It's not an exact metric that we have here, but is one of the questions that we address in the tracking plan. So I'm going to go over here to the insights report. And let's say we want to know which category of video is watched the most. So I would come over here to watch video, and this is where those properties come into play. So first off, I'm going to switch this to total event count. And then notice how there's like a filter and breakdown fields here. You can take an event and you can break it down or filter by a property. So we want to see which category was the one that was viewed the most, right? So we break it down by category. Now we get this really messy looking chart, but it's okay. We can come over here towards this line and switch it to bar. That's generally my recommendation for when you have a lot of lines. And now we see a nice little ranking showing how video viewing differs by category. That's what an event property is used for, this type of thing, to break down the events by. And you can also add filters just the same way. So let's say I want to look at a specific platform like mobile versus web. I'll pick mobile over here. And I'm saying, okay, just show me mobile numbers now. Kind of the same, but smaller numbers. And that's how properties are used. That's how you add filters and breakdowns. You could do this on funnels too. You can do this on retention too. Every part of the sort of overall Mixpanel UI, you can use both events and properties and use them as filters or breakdowns. Okay, now that we have all of our reports we wanted to have in our dashboard, let's go over there and see how it looks. All right, these are all added here. Oh, I don't know why this is performing poorly here. I think this is just an issue. Once I refresh the page, it'll probably go away. Oh, I guess I'll have to take a look at it. But you would have your funnel, you would have your engagement metric, have your retention metric, your focus metric, everything over here. And you can actually go through and add text blocks if you want, which I think are really, really useful. So you can give some description here and sort of make it into a header. I'm not going to go through the task of doing all that because that will take quite a bit of time. But you can do that, and you can also like move around your cards here and just give them the length that you want, the width that you want, that kind of thing, which makes it a lot nicer. So I do have this example over here that shows all of that stuff. So now we have the text, we have the description. Basically, a nicer looking version of what I just built for you is over here. And you can even have a little image here, which works better on a nice background, on the black background, but not here. Let's see, let's change this and make this dark. All right, there we go. Now it looks prettier. So this is how it looks when you have the full dashboard with the reports, the text, the image, all of that stuff in here. And the cool thing about dashboards is that you can apply filters at the top that apply to the entire thing instead of having to apply it on an individual basis. So right now it's looking at everything for 3 months because that was the default, but you can switch it to 6 months and it'll update all of them automatically. You can save that over here. Or you can add some other filter, like and be like, hey, you know what? Actually, I want to look only at, like we did before. I want to look only at web and add that as a filter that applies to the entire dashboard. Or you can look at a specific country. So, all right, I'm going to look at country and I'm going to look at, Argentina. It's probably going to have a lot less data in it, but yeah, still does have a lot of data. So that's how a dashboard works. You create these reports, individual reports, you add them to the dashboard, then you come to the dashboard and you add some text blocks, you sort of like line up the sizes, you come down here, add an image if you want, you add filters at the top, and then if you want to share it around, it's very simple. You just come over here and it generates a short URL that it copies to your clipboard, and you can send that to somebody and it'll bring them directly to this dashboard. So there you go. That's how you build a dashboard in Mixpanel. And once the dashboard is built, it'll always show over here in the left-hand panel under the Your Board section. Or if you take it and you pin it for the project, which I don't have the permission to do because this is a demo project made by Mixpanel, then it'll show up under this pinned section here where everybody in the project will be able to see it. Great. We have now learned how to build dashboards. So that concludes the analysis section of this course. Next up, we're going to learn about tracking plans. Let's go learn. Okay, we've learned to create our metrics. We've learned how to build a dashboard. And now that we've seen how events and properties are used to track actions and build those dashboards, you're going to learn how to put together a tracking plan. The tracking plan is the blueprint that you hand over to your engineering team so that they can actually track all the actions that I showed you earlier. The way it works is that they insert code snippets into the product's code base, and whenever these snippets are run, an event is sent to your product analytics tool of choice. But it's very, very important that you design your events correctly and track both all key actions and also the properties you need to track to have the context for your actions. Think about it this way. If you track a video watched event with no properties, you can see how many videos were watched, but you'll never be able to answer the question of which videos are actually viewed the most, because you need to track the video name as a property in order to differentiate between the different videos' views. Tracking plan building is one of the absolute most important parts of the product analytics process, and it's one of the most rare skills possessed by folks in the space, so it's highly valuable if you learn it. It's one of those skills that isn't super visible but is extremely valuable, so I really recommend that you get good at it. I work as a consultant that specializes in implementation of product analytics tools like Mixpanel and Amplitude, and I regularly get contacted by companies who are unhappy with their implementation because they can't build the dashboards they want. And over 90% of the time, the issue is that they didn't build their tracking plan the right way, and that's what I end up helping them with the most. Alright, now let's get started by looking at an example tracking plan. While dedicated tracking plan creation tools exist, I personally prefer to just use a simple Google Sheet for it. There are a few different tracking plan templates available online. This one is my own, and I'll share the link to it at the bottom of the video in case you want to use it. So let's go over the columns that are in it. First up, we have event name. Straightforward. This is the name of the event, which is the action that occurred. Note that we always use the same casing and verb tense for all the events. I like to capitalize each word of the event name and put spaces in between, making them really easily readable. I also follow what's called the object action framework. Basically, the first word of an event name is the object that an action is taken on, and the following words are a description of the action. So you have video viewed. The first word video is the object, and then viewing is the action. Video published, channel subscribed, and so on. You don't have to follow this exact format. The most important thing is that you just pick a specific one and stick with it without any deviation. Especially because tools like Mixpanel and Amplitude are case sensitive, so even if you're using the exact same name but just the casing is a little different, they'll show up as different events in the tool. Next up, we have the trigger column, also a lot of times just called event definition. This is just a description of the action that triggers the event. You want to be as specific as possible here. And make sure that you tell your developers that the event needs to be triggered when the action is fully completed. For example, if there's a publish button that they have to click to publish a video, then the event should not trigger when that button is clicked, but rather when the video is successfully published. That way, instances where the user clicks the publish button and gets an error won't incorrectly trigger a video published event. Next up, we have the list of properties for that event. Try to be as specific with your property names as possible. So instead of just a name, say video name. That way you can differentiate between things like video name and channel name and so on. Then we have a simple description of each property. It's pretty self-explanatory, just a brief description of what that property is tracking. Next up, we have the property's data type. So if what you're tracking is made up of letters and numbers, then it would be a string. If it's just numbers and you want to do arithmetic on those numbers, then it should be type number. And if it's something that just tracks true or false values, then you would want it as a Boolean with values like true or false. And last but not least, we have the property sample values. This is a super helpful column because it really helps your developers understand exactly what you're referring to when you say you want to track this property. It's also a good exercise for you to make sure you're thinking through the property correctly. Okay, now that we know what a tracking plan is for and what it looks like, let's learn how to make one the right way. The key to making a good tracking plan is to start from the questions you want to answer about your product and build your tracking plan around that. When I work with clients to implement product analytics tools, the single most common mistake I see them make is that they go, we're just going to track everything. That way we can answer any question we want later. It does not work that way. You can't track everything. The data you track needs to have the right structure to be able to answer your specific questions. If you just go with that method of tracking everything or use an auto tracker, you end up with noisy, messy data that doesn't help you at all. So if there's one thing you take away from this video, let it be this. Always start with the questions you want to answer and metrics you want to track and build your tracking plan around that. Now we're going to do this together so you can learn exactly how that's done. We're going to build a tracking plan for a video sharing platform just like YouTube, like the one you just saw. Like I said, the first thing you need to do is come up with a list of metrics and questions, which we learned how to do earlier in the video. So I'm using the same metrics that I developed using our framework shown to you earlier in the video and built the Mixpanel dashboards for in the prior section. In addition to the metrics, I also have this section for questions. These are questions that we'll be looking to answer with the data that we track as well. Like which video and which channel get the most views, how many minutes of videos are published every day, and so on. I want to emphasize again, the order I did things in this video is optimized for better learning. In reality, you do metric development first, then tracking plan design, and then dashboard building. Okay, let's review it together. Let's start at the top. The first metric is weekly active users, and define active users as anyone who has watched a video. So we need an event for when a user views a video. Let's add it to our blank tracking plan over here on the second tab. Put the name under the event name column, and the trigger is the user has started viewing the video. Cool. Now we have an event and its trigger. Note that we haven't added any properties yet because for this metric, we don't really need to know what video is viewed. We just need to know that videos are viewed. And so all we need is just an event and its trigger. Next up, we have the exposure. That's the number of users who arrived on the homepage. So I can add that as well. I can say homepage viewed. User has arrived on the homepage for the site. Again, just a simple insights report will get this done. We covered insights reports in the previous section. We just made a chart, shows how many users have done this, how many users have done this, and that covers our first two metrics. Then we have activation rate. That is conversion from signing up to watching a video. Well, we already have examples for homepage view and watching a video, but we don't have one for signing up. So let's add a sign up completed event. Just completed their sign up. All right. And I'm going to reorganize this a little to just be in the order that they occur. Then I come to the homepage, you sign up, you watch a video. Cool. Then we have engagement rate, average number of videos watched per user. Well, we already have an event for watching a video, and we know that in the insights report, you can always say frequency per user as the way to aggregate the data, so we don't actually need an extra event for this. And for 14-day retention, percentage of users who signed up and then continue watching 14 days after sign up, same thing. We have a sign up event, we have a video watched event, both of the things that we need are there, so we don't actually need to add extra events. So pretty simple, with just 2 or 3 events, we can track all the core KPIs that we had developed in that section. If you recall, that's how it looked in the framework section too. We had that arrow that showed how the user's moving along, and with just a couple of events, we were able to make it work. It was basically one for sign up or viewing a homepage, another one for completing onboarding, and another one for the key action, which in this case is watching a video. Now that we have these, then we move on to our questions. Our questions say, okay, what video gets the most views? Well, this just says a video has been viewed. It doesn't say anything about which one has been viewed. So we add a property here called video name. Name of the video is its definition. Like I said, this is usually pretty self-explanatory. This is going to be a type string because the name is going to be something like, Product Analytics Academy crash course. And this will be, Xpanel retention tutorial or Product Analytics crash course. Cool. The second question we had said which channel gets the most views. Again, this one just says the video name. Now it needs the channel name too if we want to know which channels are getting the most views. So I come over here and I add that as well. Channel name. Again, note that I specify channel name. I don't just say name on the video. It's like in video name, channel name. I differentiate them from one another. I say name of the channel string. I'm going to call it Analytics Academy. And I make sure that I use consistent casing because they will show up as different values if I do not. Back here, how many minutes of videos are published every day? Well, we don't actually have an event for publishing a video, so let's add that first, and then we need a property for how many minutes long the video is. So I come over here and I say video published. User has successfully published. Man, I keep making spelling mistakes. Video. And remember, we're going to have to add video duration. I'm going to say duration of the video in minutes. This is one of those places where property definition is helpful because we specify if we're saying in minutes or in seconds. and then we say number, and it'll be like 4.5. So I'll say typically it's probably best to track things as seconds and convert them later. And then, while this is not necessary, it is probably helpful to have this information on here as well. Like, it's not something that's going to immediately answer our questions, but we should also use our common sense when we're making this stuff. I think, if we're going to publish a video, we probably want to know the name and the channel name that it was on. So I'm just going to copy paste those over as well. And last, what portion of viewers convert to content creators? Essentially, what portion of our viewers actually end up publishing a video after they've signed up? And we don't need anything extra for that. We already have sign up completed and we have video published. So we just need to build a funnel tool that has this as the first step and this is the second step. So there we go. Here we have it. Just with these simple 4 events, 2 of which don't even have any properties, we're able to monitor our core metrics, break them down by some key dimensions, and get answers to several key questions. And yeah, I'm not going to get all the way to here in this video because that'll take a while, but you can see that as you list out more metrics, as you list out more questions, you just come across more and more events and event properties that you need to create for your product. A common question people have is like, okay, well, how many events should I make? Look, it differs from product to product. If you're just launching or if it's your first time implementing and your product isn't super complicated, generally less than 20. Like if you find yourself making 100 unique events, you're probably tracking too much. Go with this method that I told you, come up with KPIs and questions and work your way from there. And you'll probably come up with just like 10 or 15 and you'll be able to answer a ton of questions with those 10 or 15. So that is the approach that you want to go with. Don't add 100 events to your tracking plan. All those events require engineering work to get implemented. And if there's too many of them, you won't get to QA them right. It'll take too long. You'll never get it through. So be specific. So yeah, you can take this tracking plan that we've created over here, or this longer version over here, and you hand it to your engineering team so you can implement it. If you're a product manager making a product requirements document, I recommend just having a section in there for analytics and in it include a link to this tracking plan or just embed a table containing this information. Alternatively, you can create a ticket containing this info in your agile development platform like Jira or Linear and assign it to your engineers. Once they've implemented and QA'd everything, you can then go use your product analytics tool like Mixpanel or Amplitude to build out reports that actually answer your questions. And remember, this stuff is done in rounds. You do this process to answer your key questions first, and then you do it continuously as your product is getting built out and you add new features to it. You have to keep repeating this process to make sure that your product analytics is up to date. And that's that. That's how you create a tracking plan. It's this exact process that I showed you. You just repeat it for more and more questions and KPIs, and you just continue to make the tracking plan be up to date and answer more and more of your questions. The process doesn't change. You just repeat it, and this thing keeps getting longer and longer. And as it gets longer, you're able to build more and more dashboards and answer more key questions and so on. Okay, well, now that we've covered all 3 topics we wanted to cover, let's recap what we learned. When you have a new product or a new feature of product, you start out by developing KPIs for it. For that, you can use the method I showed you earlier where you come up with a focus metric and then 3 or 4 other metrics like activation rate and engagement rate, all of which contribute to your focus metric. That way, if your focus metric changes, you can easily see what aspects of your product contributed to that change and work on that particular aspect. Then, you create what's called a tracking plan. The tracking plan is a spreadsheet that lists out all the events and properties you need to track in order to be able to calculate these metrics that you just came up with. In a tracking plan, events signify actions that are taken by a user, and they have a timestamp indicating when it occurred, and then properties are context for that action that are tracked alongside it. So for example, if your activation rate is defined as number of people who watched the video divided by number of people who visited the site, then you need an event for when a video has been watched, and then you need another event for when the homepage has been viewed. Both of these get tracked, you get numbers for each action, you divide them by one another, and you get what you need. Then also, if you want to see which video was the most viewed, then you track the video name alongside the video viewed event, and you can break it down by that property to see what video was viewed the most. You then hand that tracking plan to your engineering team who implement it using code snippets inserted into your product's code. These code snippets send the event to a product analytics tool every time the code snippet is run. Popular product analytics tools include Mixpanel, Amplitude, Posthog, Pendo, and Heap. Once that data is flowing into your tool, which looks something like this, you can see all these events that are coming in. You can open one and see a bunch of its properties. Then you can go ahead and build reports that monitor those core KPIs you developed earlier, as well as answer any questions you might have. So here I have that dashboard that I built earlier. It's looking at weekly active users, activation rate, engagement rate, retention, all of these important things that we talked about, all these metrics that we came up with to measure the performance of our product. You then use the insights gained from these dashboards to inform your future product changes, which lead to new metrics, which lead to an updated tracking plan, and the cycle continues like that. The one step that we didn't cover here is split testing, which is generally the process done as part of the launch of a new feature. In that step, you compare two variations of the product in order to see which one performs the best. You can use every step we did here in order to get an answer to that question too, but there are just some nuances you should learn, and I'll tell you where to learn about that in a second. But the three most important and useful parts of being a product analyst or a data-driven product manager is what you learned in this video. So now that you've learned all of this, you might be asking, okay, what next? Great question. One option is you just stop right here and you go apply all that you learned here today to your product. You'll get tremendous value out of it and you'll continue to learn more just by repeating this process. Just sitting here for the past hour or so and completing this video is a major step, and your career will thank you for the time you spent improving your skills. But there are definitely ways to get much better at this and go from an amateur but competent product analyst to a more advanced and confident one. You do that through learning more about each of the topics we covered here, because there's a lot in each area that we can't cover in an hour. You can also do it by learning new topics, like the split testing nuances that I mentioned earlier. And most importantly, you can learn it by practicing these skills through well-designed and hands-on exercises. Fortunately for us, I cover all three of those areas for you in a longer course that I call the Ultimate Product Analytics course, and it's hosted on my site, productanalytics.academy. The teaching style is very similar to what you learned in this video, so if you liked how I taught everything that I taught you here, then you're going to like how I do it here as well. The course is made up of 5 separate sections. The initial mini course is just the product success metrics that you saw earlier in the video. And then course 1 is a deeper dive into the understanding of product metrics and KPIs. Each section has a bunch of different courses, so that portion about product metrics is just one video in this overall section. And you learn to do things like, how do you quantify a qualitative trait? When should you use an average versus a median? And so on. And then we have a whole section on A/B testing. It tells you how your metrics should be set up for a split test, as well as common mistakes to avoid it. This is the area we didn't cover in this video. And then there's a section on report building, which digs deeper into Mixpanel, showing you how to calculate product retention and building user cohorts. Then there's a section on tracking plans that covers things like user properties and how to incorporate tracking plans into a product requirements document. And finally, there's a section that teaches you SQL, but just enough SQL for a product manager or product analyst so that you develop the single most important technical skill when it comes to data analysis, which is analyzing data via SQL. Every section comes with its own set of practice exercises that force you to apply what you learned in a solutions video that covers how to do every exercise correctly. And to cap it all off, there's also an optional final project that you can complete to really feel confident in your skills. And if you do that, you can also get a certificate which you can add to your LinkedIn profile. So basically, it covers everything you need in order to take things to the next level. Now, I'm not going to tell you that, if you don't take the course, then you won't be any good. Absolutely not. You've learned plenty here today, and even if you stop right here, you are still much better than this than you were an hour ago. This is just an option for those of you who want to get even better than this, because I genuinely believe that there is a very high return on the investment of spending a few more hours getting better at product analytics. So if you decide to go there, I'll include a link and a discount code in the video description for you to use. Alright folks, that covers it all. Thank you so much for watching. I know it was kind of long, but I hope it was worth it. If you have any questions about what I covered, please leave a comment and I'll answer as quickly as I can. I also love receiving requests for other topics to cover, so make sure you let me know about those too. Thank you again and have a great rest of your day.